Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The general election has come at a time for Northern Ireland that's loaded with jeopardy. The political scene here is entirely different from anywhere else in the UK. But right now, devolution, Stormont, is suspended after a bust-up between the DUP and Sinn Féin and may not return anytime soon. That, in turn, has huge implications for Northern Ireland's voice in the Brexit negotiations and the role of the 18 Westminster MPs from Northern Ireland to be elected on June the 8th. The border is the big issue after Brexit, and here they voted to remain. Northern Ireland will be the UK's only land frontier with the EU. There are few people who believe a hard border would be anything other than disastrous. And the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has said categorically that the border issue was one of 3 priorities to be resolved before Britain can negotiate a trade deal, something disputed at the weekend by the Brexit Secretary, David Davis. Sinn Féin have used Brexit to ramp up their call for a referendum on unification, and the EU has agreed that in the event of a vote to unify, Northern Ireland would automatically be subsumed into the EU as part of Ireland. The DUP say a border poll would destabilise Northern Ireland when stability is needed. Once again, the divide comes down to unionists versus nationalists. Before we debate the issues with senior figures in the main political parties here, the BBC's Ireland correspondent Chris Buckler explores the key issues at play in the election against a divide that seems to be reasserting itself.
Invisible lines in this land will soon mark where one union ends and another begins. This will be the edge of both the EU and the UK. Davy Crockett is a descendant of his namesake, the famous American frontiersman.
Come on, come on.
His farm, which straddles the Irish border on the outskirts of Londonderry,
Easy, gear, easy.
makes him the king of a new frontier, the one with Europe.
This is the border. You are now in the Republic, and I am in Northern Ireland, or UK, or whatever you like to call it, and I can shake hands with you here across the divide.
But if this border was to go sometime in the future, the EU has made clear that Northern Ireland could be part of their union again.
Do you think that being part of the European Union would be an incentive for people to vote to go for United Ireland?
No. Agriculture would be better in Europe, but the vast majority of the people, they would be feared of losing what they'd get from the British taxpayer, not what they'd get from Europe.
But Republicans believe Brexit could strengthen their case and support for their ultimate aim, a united Ireland.
It's only 3 months since the last vote here, a bitter Assembly election that left the parties deeply divided and Stormont without a government. And Sinn Féin say they won't go back into power sharing with unionists unless some of their demands are met, including legislation that would give official status to the Irish language.
If you feed a crocodile, they're going to keep coming back and looking for more.
That was the Democratic Unionist leaders' response to calls for an Irish Language Act. It fired Republican anger and helped Sinn Féin to its best election result ever, something they celebrated in crocodile costumes. But Arlene Foster now appears to be trying to reach out, even speaking Irish when she visited this Catholic school in Newry.
Hosí meg Lort na Gaeilge nuair a bhí me 3 bliana d'aois. Ó hen, Lóriam Gaeilge a an lá.
Irish is the first language of just 1/4% of the population here. But it's important to the students who the DUP leader met at Our Lady's.
And whether you see yourself as Irish, whether you see yourself as Northern Irish, whether you see yourself as British, you know, Irish is for everyone.
You kind of feel more Irish than Northern Irish?
Yeah.
Does anybody feel Northern Irish?
That silence might be telling. Reinforcing an Irish identity is important in Sinn Féin's push for what's known as a border poll, a referendum vote on Irish unity.
with the heart, it's the passion, it's the love of the Irish language, culture, and the hope one day for the reunification of Ireland, but I don't know if this is the time for it or not.
The peace walls that divide much of Belfast mark out what are broadly seen as Catholic nationalist areas from Protestant unionist neighbourhoods. But there are population changes taking place here that could have an impact on any future border poll.
When do you think the number of Catholics will outnumber the number of Protestants?
Maybe 10, maybe 20 years.
Is there a danger in overplaying the number of Catholics actually supporting a united Ireland?
Well, the census figures might overplay that. And here I'm just calling to mind evidence I remember seeing from public surveys, where I saw evidence that a quarter of Sinn Féin voters wouldn't vote for United Ireland just then.
Years of peace have changed places like Belfast, and that's not just about investment. Many accept that the clash of cultures here is part of their identity. 1 in 5 say they see themselves as Northern Irish. But Tina McKenzie, who was once part of a now defunct cross-community party called NI21, says the last election showed voters are motivated by conflict, not compromise.
We had the biggest turnout since the Good Friday Agreement, 10 full percentage points up on last time. I mean, that's a huge show, and that's because people actually felt threatened. There was this call from unionists to say, oh, we might get a nationalist majority, a nationalist about equality and equal rights. It pulls at the strings of people's core identity.
Modern politics in Northern Ireland is still something of a prisoner to history. And that's not surprising when you consider that many voters lived through years of horrendous violence.
My wife and I were at that cenotaph. The moment of, I was going in and out of consciousness.
Jim Dixon was seriously injured in the Enniskillen bombing.
My skull was smashed like an eggshell. I was split from here, right up to here. And my jaw was missing on that side.
The IRA attack on a Remembrance Day service in that town 30 years ago is an event that's impossible to forget.
People today are being fed a lot of garbage about these people have changed. They only changed to get to where they're going and to get control. What does these terrorists want? They said they want to unite Ireland. If they never had it started, they would have been united Ireland 40 years ago. Killing and murdering people doesn't unite people.
How people see and want that troubled past to be remembered is something that divides communities. Legacy and issues of identity polarise with every vote here, and that will be true once again in this general election, with unionists appealing to their core base and nationalists theirs, all contributing to the many reasons why there's no strong nor stable government at Stormont. At election time, nationalists and unionists often seem to be speaking a different language. But away from the heat of that battle for votes, they need to find ways of understanding each other. Otherwise, the past will continue to haunt future generations, be they British, Irish or Northern Irish.
Chris Buckler there. Well, I'm joined now by Sinn Féin's John O'Dowd, Jeffrey Donaldson of the DUP, Naomi Long from the Alliance Party, Claire Hanna from the SDLP, and the Ulster Unionist Steve Aiken. Thank you all for joining us tonight. First of all, Jeffrey Donaldson, the implication of Brexit being at the heart of this election is that it reinforces the divide, and the DUP was the only party that voted for Brexit.
Well, that's true, but 45% of the people of Northern Ireland voted for Brexit, and we get 30% normally in an election, so we're fishing in a very big pond as far as we're concerned. The And I sense it when I'm out canvassing. I think support for the DUP is going to increase at this election as a result of Brexit. I think people are voting DUP to see Brexit delivered.
But John O'Dowd, I mean, Sinn Féin used the spectre of Brexit to push for unification, but the figures don't add up because a post-Brexit opinion poll said that only 22% support a united Ireland. So are you rowing back from the idea of having a referendum on unification?
Brexit is the biggest constitutional change on the island of Ireland since partition. And the figures you quote me from an opinion poll from wherever are similar in figures to the Scottish independence opinion polls a year before the Scottish independence referendum took place. So we do not fear a referendum on Irish unity. Bring on the referendum in regards to Irish unity and we'll happily fight it.
And do you really believe, as an SDLP, do you believe, Claire, Hannah, that there is any appetite for a vote on unification just now?
I think Brexit has undoubtedly put Irish unity much further up the political agenda, but all of the challenges in that respect that existed on the 22nd of June remain about reconciliation. And if Brexit showed us anything, it's the division and the damage of a massive constitutional question boiled down to a binary yes or no answer, and how divisive it was even in the UK. So we think while we deal with the massive challenge, economic, political shocks of Brexit, polarising it and making it through a green and orange lens isn't the most constructive approach.
It's not the time. Steve Aiken, I mean, the UUP voted for Remain, but are committed now to making the best of Brexit. And
we are out in front of, we're a unionist party.
But you want to, you're pushing for special designated status for Northern Ireland. What is that?
Well, what we're looking for is Northern Ireland, and we're not looking for special designated status. What we want is the best deal for Northern Ireland going forward. We want to have Northern Ireland not being penalised by Brexit, but more importantly, looking at the opportunities.
But what would it look like?
Well, let's look at it this way. We keep on talking about the issues around borders.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't have any borders across these islands at all. We shouldn't have any hard borders. We should have free movement. We should have the ability to move trade and goods and services across. And one of the things we need to be able to do is we need to be able to maintain that flow of over €1 million a week, or sorry, €1 billion a week, going back and forth to get it done.
How would that work? I mean, let's just bring in the Alliance Party here. You're across, as it were, community party. How would something that Steve Aiken's talking about working? There'd be absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. That's not going to happen. If you're outside a customs union, it's not going to happen.
Well, I think that that's one of the real concerns of this, because what we've had is, despite the fact that the country is actually quite divided over Brexit, with both Scotland and Northern Ireland unhappy with Brexit, we have a government that seems to be hurtling towards the hardest of Brexits. What we would expect from a government that argues that it's in favour of the Union would be that it would moderate its approach to Brexit and try to find a form of Brexit that would protect the best of what we have in the European Union whilst living up to the demands of a democratic vote. We certainly believe, in terms of Northern Ireland, that we need to protect the freedom of movement that we have, not only because it's important economically and socially, but because it's important politically in Northern Ireland, and it's part of the expectation that flows from the Good Friday Agreement.
But do you really believe the UUP's position is correct, that there'll be absolutely no restrictions anywhere?
It's impossible that there will be no restrictions. We're talking about two separate economic units being forced upon the people on the island of Ireland. So what we're saying is, allow the North to remain within the EU. If the people of England and Wales wish to leave the European Union, so be it. But when we're putting together two economic units pushed against each other, against the will of the people, there is going to be barriers in place.
Just to say, we will bring you all back into the light as soon as is possible.
The metaphor here.
We're in the line. We're on the line over here.
No, but Naomi, coming back to you, the whole point, surely, for the Alliance Party is how do you squeeze your way through here? Because with very polarised positions, you're going to drop down a hole in the middle.
Well, not at all, because actually in the last election we polled our best vote in the last 40 years, because I think when politics here polarises, it also motivates those of us who actually see that Brexit cannot be seen through an orange and green lens. There is much more to this issue. It affects those on both the unionist side and the national side, and also those, frankly, who don't define themselves in those terms. We need the best deal for Northern Ireland as a whole. That is good for the UK, and it is good for Ireland.
Sorry, Claire.
Well, I think just going back on the special status, and that's the point, those of us who campaign for Remain asked repeatedly how you could marry up the hard Brexiters talking about protect our borders with the free movement that we need and that we enjoy, and we still haven't had the answer. But special designated status isn't just necessary, it's inevitable. There are already specific circumstances here. We will have to be treated differently. And one thing, sure, the EU understand Northern Ireland a lot better than London do.
So, do you believe that Claire is right about that whole idea that there'll have to be special designated status, even though that you were voting for Brexit and, you know, come what may, that's what you wanted?
Well, first of all, the idea that Brussels knows Northern Ireland better than London is just a nonsense, and let's knock that on the head. London knows this place very well. London funds this place, Claire, and has done for many, many years. And the idea of a united Ireland and that being economically viable is just unsustainable. So in terms of hard borders, no one around this table is arguing for a hard border. In fact, the only people I hear talking up the idea of a hard border is not Steve Aiken and I, it's Sinn Féin.
But what did you actually expect to happen?
It's like the old days. Sinn Féin talk about United Ireland and blow up the Belfast to Dublin railway line. I mean, it's that kind of nonsensical
thinking. What did you
thinking.
expect to happen? Did you expect that you would vote for Brexit and everything would be fine, everything would be open borders and there'd be no change, there'd be free movement of people through, there'd be no tariffs? You thought it would all be fine?
Well, we had a common travel area on this island long before the EU ever existed.
But we also had common immigration policies.
So, you know, we have a history
common
here
immigration
of
policies,
working these things
common
through.
customs policies.
We will be able to work them through pragmatically. I don't believe Dublin wants a hard border. Belfast doesn't want a hard border. But I'll tell you what Belfast does need. We need a government, John.
Yes.
We need to have Stormont functioning so that we can take the decisions for the people who elect us that will enable us to get the special deal that you're talking about. Right now, you're denying the people of Northern Ireland
We're going to talk about Stormont, because do you believe without Stormont that you will have a lesser voice in negotiations? Realistically,
I think it's very clear.
The voice I'm interested in relation to the Brexit debate is the voice of the Constitutional Research Council, which paid the DUP almost £500,000 to fund adverts, not here in the north, but to influence your listeners in London through the Metro. Where did that money come from? Why did
because it was a UK referendum,
Why did the DUP...
A referendum that you didn't take part in.
You can shout me down.
The lowest turnout in Northern Ireland was in West Belfast. Nationalist West Belfast.
So what we want to do... Hang on.
This is sort of distraction that we get.
Let's not distract ourselves with this at the moment. What we want to talk about now is exactly what a border would look like and what the impact for people of the border would be on Northern Ireland. And I want to ask you, Steve Aiken, this. Do you agree with Michel Barnier that without resolution on the border there can't be a trade deal?
But here we are. We're right at the beginning of the negotiations. There are all sorts of things to be negotiated about. Let's look at...
But do you agree with him?
Let's talk about some of the wider issues. Where I was down in Dublin yesterday, listening to discussions about the Norway-Sweden border, we're looking at the French-Swiss model. And the fact that we're on islands, there are alternative approaches to make this happen. The United Kingdom's been a trading nation for well over 1,000 years. We can make it work. The problem's but the problem's not going to be on the UK side of it. The problem is going to be the border posts that are going to be imposed by the EU and the Republic of Ireland. The Republic of Ireland doesn't want that. The Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom want to work together to make it work. And we can make it work. And we will make it work.
Do you believe that, Naomi Long?
Well, I have to say that Steve's colleague, from his MEP colleague, was actually saying this week that Dublin should basically keep its nose out of Northern Ireland's business. And now he's arguing that London and Dublin should be working closely together to make sure we get the best possible border. The reality is that if you have a customs differentiation, if you have a differentiation in terms of duty, you will have to have some measure of being able to take care of that at the border. Now, that may not result in the kind of border that we had in the 1970s, which were there for security reasons. But no one has been able to take us to any location where there is a border between Europe and another nation and show us the seamless border that we're to expect. And it is right that we should be concerned about that.
Now, people are talking, about a different kind of border, that actually what you would do is you put a border, essentially a land border, and it would be a border of airports and ports. Is that impossible?
Nothing is impossible in this day and age, Kirsty. I mean, we've got modern electronic surveillance.
But do you really want a border like that? That would more likely to reach a united Ireland if you have a border of ports.
We have it now already. We have it now already.
We already have arrangements between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland where there is a massive sharing of information every single day, Kirsty. People who come into Dublin, that information is fed through to London. That's happening already.
Do you fear, Claire Hannah, do you fear the spectre of that hard and horrible border?
And I think not just for the economy, which would be crippled by that, but I think the intangible benefits that came with the agreement and peace and free movement and access, unimpeded access to the rest of the island, particularly for nationalists, but for the economy as well. And if that's under threat, I think, as you've outlined it, a border around the island would be the only practical way. But it would be unreasonable for Ireland to be expected to enforce the Brexit immigration policies.
A hard Brexit, and would a hard Brexit lead to a hard border?
No, I think the key. Excuse me, John. I think the key question has to be. It's particularly things to do with agribusiness. It's not to do necessarily with tariffs, it's to do with regulation. Those are the important things we need to get sorted out and look at what we're trying to do.
So explain to me what would happen. Explain to me what would happen with the economy. If you have cross-border businesses all the time. Essentially, you have one economy, two countries. So if you have a third of your milk production from Northern Ireland existing in the Republic, is that a problem or is it not? Is it reciprocal, isn't it?
Of course it's a problem. And we're missing the point here when we talk about hard borders or soft borders or frictionless borders. It's an economic border that currently doesn't exist. So businesses who currently trade across the island of Ireland, who do not have to pay tariffs, who do not have to pay customs, are going to have to pay those. So the customs
How do you know that, John? The negotiations haven't even begun. How do you know that's going to be the outcome?
Well, you see,
I mean,
how are you going to get unimpeded access to the single market?
We know what the current situation is. The DUP led us down a pathway with their dark money and everything else towards a Brexit. But they couldn't answer those questions before Brexit. They don't know what sort of customs, but we do know we're leaving the customs union, so there will be customs.
We don't know that. There will. And you know, you touched on something else. There's a ferocious amount of detail, but at the moment we have no executive. We had no government. These two parties collapsed it without putting any strategy in place. So at the moment, nobody is shouting for Northern Ireland and working on this detail.
Let's now absolutely turn to that and talk about Northern Ireland's influence in the negotiation. John O'Dowd, if there is no Stormont, then a vote for Sinn Féin surely is totally useless when you don't take your seats at Westminster. You have no way to influence Brexit.
No voice.
Well, we are wasted vote. Well, let me use my voice. We are proud Irish Republicans. We will not take an oath of allegiance to the Queen of England. With no disrespect to the Queen of England, but I'm not taking an oath of allegiance to her or to her heirs. But in relation to...
That's always been the position.
Always been the position.
But I'm saying...
You said the same in the Irish.
I'm also a nationalist.
What I'm saying about that in this situation... What I'm saying about that in this situation is if you don't have a voice at Westminster, which you don't have, and you don't have a voice at Stormont because it doesn't exist and it doesn't look like it's coming back anytime soon, where is your voice heard?
I think you'll find that Sinn Féin's voice is heard loud and clear across the island of Ireland. It's heard loud and clear in London. And I sat on the Joint Ministerial Council with the Welsh Executive and the Scottish Executive and the British Government when we had an executive. And not only were our views ignored, but the views of the Welsh and the Scottish Executive were ignored as well. But I put this challenge out to those parties who do take their seats. Tell me which vote you overturned in Westminster in relation to Brexit. Tell me which vote you overturned.
Of course, I'm a proud nationalist as well, and I would like that. Does John think he's a better Irishman than David or Parnell or O'Connell and other people who found it in themselves to represent their people? Are you a better nationalist than the SNP and Plaid and people who use that voice?
Is the SDLP's position then that you think that Sinn Féin is letting down the people of Ireland by not...
Entirely, particularly because they're making us all abstentionists from Stormont at the moment. None of us have a voice in that respect, but absolutely, we, the SDLP, have turned over every stone on Brexit and we have been everywhere we need to be.
What vote did you overturn?
But you know what? We're going to have 5 years of press releases and tweets from Sinn Féin. That's brilliant, but where it counts in votes, you won't bother turning up.
I'd just like to be clear about this. So you actually think Stormont's pretty useless then?
No, I'm asking about Westminster. Those people who take their seats in Westminster, I'm asking them which Brexit vote did they overturn?
John wants us to believe that 3 MPs from the SDLP in Westminster can have no impact in 650 MPs, but your 4 MEPs can change the world.
Well, I'd like to bring in the alliance in on this. I'd like to bring the alliance in on this. Do you say a plague on both your houses, DUP and Sinn Féin, for not sorting out this business over Stormont? Because, you know, if this continues, if the negotiations at the end of June to reinstate Stormont fail, then you are looking at direct rule again.
Well, we are, and I think that that is absolutely the worst thing that could happen in the context of Northern Ireland. And if John believes, as he does, that the current government is insensitive to Northern Ireland's needs and doesn't show respect, then what better way to place a buffer between the people he represents and the government in London than to have devolution operational? And I have to say, John, you know, I spent 5 years in Westminster, and it is quite possible to change people's minds through persuasion and argument and voting. In fact, I changed the law as a single member of Parliament. Now, you can't do that by walking around talking to people in Westminster, by hiring rooms and by tweeting and sending out press releases. But you can do it if you turn up, you work with others on a cross-party basis. I changed the law about donations.
One law in 5 years.
No, I changed the law about donations and I influenced change in others. It's more law. I have to say, it's more law than your party changed in all that time.
You have a democracy.
The UUP's position now on a return of Stormont.
We definitely want Stormont back up and running. And here's the interesting thing.
You also help collapse it.
In the talks that were going just before, we were getting fairly close to consensus of all the parties together on Brexit. We were working very closely. John, you were there. Claire, you were there. Naomi, you were there. We were getting very close to actually having a document and a policy that we could be taking forward. We need to get the Northern Ireland Assembly back up and running as soon as this election is out the way and get the executive up and running.
Jeffrey, do you think that the glory days of Stormont might be over? Because when you had Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley, who could command their communities, it was a completely different matter, and actually it worked. There was a kind of, the magnet was sort of going like that, it worked. But without them, none of you here has the power to reinstate Stormont properly.
I don't agree with that at all, Kirsty. I think 4 of the parties represented around this table are ready to get Stormont up and running today. There's only one party that is saying they're not prepared to go into government and are holding the whole of Northern Ireland to ransom, and that party is Sinn Féin.
But do you think
it is absolutely... No, sorry, Claire. Let me be absolutely clear. The DUP has nil preconditions for going back into government. We are ready to go back into government tomorrow without any... Sorry, Naomi, that is wrong.
To make the progress required, you make it difficult for us to restore it.
We are prepared to go into government in Northern Ireland tomorrow without any preconditions.
Very briefly, do you think
Sinn Féin are blocking that?
Just very briefly to Claire, very briefly to Claire, do you think we're about to enter a period of real instability in Ireland?
Well, I desperately hope we aren't, and particularly if we're going into direct rule, all the more reason that we need strong voices in Westminster making the case. But it doesn't have to be that way. We've solved bigger problems than this with the right attitude.
Thank you all very much. And just before we go back to London, I'd just like to apologise for the slightly strange lighting throughout this debate. Thank you very much. Back to you, Evan.
I've been getting away with it all